right, looks like we are live, everybody. Welcome to Standing for Truth. I am your host, Don, and tonight we have an epic debate between Jackson Rowe and Jonathan Guzzman. They will be debating the important topic, the important question: did modern birds come from non-avian theropod dinosaurs? Both Jackson and Guzzman here are well studied and highly knowledgeable on this specific topic, which means this is definitely going to be a debate to remember. So everybody sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. So let's get right into it. Jackson, we're going to hand it over to you. You've got a 15-minute opening statement. I can always give you a 1-minute warning to let you kind of start winding things down around the 14-minute mark. But we're pretty easy going here. So go ahead, Jackson.
All right, go ahead and share the screen I have. First time I'm going to be doing that in debate. All right, this is Siricornis. Well, first I should probably say dinosaurs and birds share a lot physiologically in similarities. We'll get more into that as we go on, but right now I'm just going to show the kind of line of progression that we have from fossils. This is Siricornis. It's dated to 165 million years old, the late Jurassic. It has both filament feathers on the neck and tail, as well as some more pennaceous feathers on the arms, but probably wasn't flying at this point. Then this is Kai Hong. Make sure that everything's right here. Hang on. This is Kai Hong, another theropod with feathers. This is 161 million years old, dated that age. You can see the large tail fan, the tail feathers. They all had different hips. These kind of had intermediate hips between what you would call a dinosaur and a bird. This is Geology, which is somewhat similar to Archaeopteryx, 160 million years old. This is one of my favorites. This is Eosinopterix. This one's known from over 200 specimens. It had, like the other ones, had 3 digits in the hand, long Surian tail, teeth, all that. But this one had was capable of flight. It had wings on both its forelimbs, obviously, but also on the hind limbs, unusually. This is Eosinopterix, another 160 million year old one. Not too much to say about this one other than it's clearly a theropod and it had some filamentous feathers. This is a weird one. It's Yi. It's known from this one specimen. It actually had simple feathers along with membranous wings like a bat. This one's 159 million years old. So this one was flying, but had an underdeveloped breastbone. Then, of course, there's Archaeopteryx, which is 150 or so million years old. Then the lineage is kind of split from here into more what you would call modern-looking birds and still dinosaurs that still existed alongside them, but also had feathers. This is Protopteryx. It had 3 unfused digits in the wing and teeth, but pyga style like modern birds. And you can see it looks very much like a modern bird in those features, but its feathers were also more primitive. This is Siricornis. They're about 125 to 130 million years old, the birds I'm showing here, or the primitive birds. This one actually had the 4-wing layout similar to Eosinopterix. This is Confuciusornis. This is the most bird-like on the list. It still had 3 infused digits in the wing, but it had a pyga style and a beak with no teeth. This is Eosinopterix. It had teeth and unfused digits. I tried to get these in chronological order, but these are just basal birds, just in no particular real order. This is Longissimus, I think is how it's pronounced. You can see the teeth. This is Sulcavus, which also you can see had teeth. Now, on the other side, living alongside these birds, or primitive birds, are the more feathered dinosaurs. Like this one is Zenwanlong. This was a 6-foot theropod with wings, as you can see, and tail feathers, but about the size of a turkey, so probably not capable of flight. This is Changi Raptor. You see the feathers up here and along the neck. Another fairly large, about 4 feet long. This is Microraptor, very small one, known from several specimens. And we've got the biggest feathered dinosaur of all, Eosinopterix, which is about 30 feet long, rather. Known from 3 specimens, all of which had evidence of filamentous feathers on them. You could argue that these were collagen fibers, but they were about 8 inches long, so it would be a bit long for collagen. This is Dilong, evidence of feathers on a Dilong, which was a primitive tyrannosaur, a very small tyrannosaur. And this is Changi Raptor, the largest of the Microraptoria family. At 4 feet long, it was a 4-winged glider as well. This is Wulong, another small Microraptoria dinosaur. And interestingly, it had 2 long tail feathers, as you can see here. Yeah, I really just wanted to show this progression of fossils. So that's pretty much the opening I want to give for now. I'll see what Jonathan has to say about it, and then we'll get more into it.
All right, Jackson, I appreciate that. And what we do here on Standing for Truth is the time that you don't use for your openings or rebuttals. We still like to utilize it, so we will throw it into either the discussion or the audience Q&A. We'll see how everything goes. So that being said, we're going to hand it over to Guzzman. We'll get that screen shared of yours, and you have 15 minutes for your opening statement on your first word. I'll start the timer.
All right, awesome. Well, I want to thank Standing for Truth and Jackson for coming on for tonight's discussion. I'd like to start off my presentation by quoting Robert Bacher. He says in his book, The Dinosaur Heresies, he says, quote, "Old theories like the reptilian nature of dinosaurs are accepted like old friends of the family. You don't yell at old Aunt Cecilia, so 100-year-old dinosaur theories live on without being questioned, and too often they are assumed to be totally correct. Even when such a theory is caught in error, it's likely to be excused." Now, he was talking about the physiology of dinosaurs, but I think that it's time that we start asking about the dinosaur to bird connection. Now, if you like my argument in short, this is what it is. Number 1, evolution from dinosaurs to birds requires countless transitional species in a chronological series over a certain period of time. Number 2, many fossil specimens have been found, but can hardly be called transitional. Number 3, these fossils do not even appear in a chronological series, rather in a bush pattern, almost random. And I say almost. Keep that in mind. Many of the fossils do not appear in the time or order anticipated. And so that's basically my argument in short, but here's my argument in long. But before I do, I will not be arguing that birds are not similar to dinosaurs. Birds are similar to dinosaurs in the morphology, behavior, and physiology, as Jackson pointed out in his opener. Here's a couple of pictures. Down you have Tyrannosaurus rex, Siricornis, and Caudipteryx. So you have these 3 specimens. The Tyrannosaurus rex bone is an example of a medullary bone, very similar to that in birds. Caudipteryx is an example of a brooding dinosaur, one that sat on its eggs, similar to that behavior which is exhibited in birds today. And Caudipteryx has feathers, clear signs of them, pennaceous feathers on the arms, tail, and around the chest area. And so even Richard Owen, who wasn't a Darwinist, was impressed by the advanced bird-like shape of dinosaurs' hip bones. I won't be arguing that birds are not similar to dinosaurs, nor will I be arguing that birds are not dinosaurs. According to this phylogenetic graphing, which is taken from a paper written by Brusati et al., who I've spoken with on a couple of occasions, birds are classified with dinosaurs, and they clearly do. Here's some more introduction. You can pause it if you'd like. This is a paper from the International Conference on Creationism. An evolutionist will say that birds are dinosaurs in the sense that birds evolved from dinosaurs, but we can say that birds are dinosaurs in the sense that birds are a subgroup of dinosaurs in a larger pattern of God's creation, and that they are not all related through common descent. Keep that word in mind, all. It's going to get a little bit slippery here after this. So here you can pause to read a bit. The old dichotomy of bird versus dinosaurs is unhelpful and incorrect, and so on and so forth. I won't even be arguing that all birds are not related to dinosaurs. Keep that in mind. We're going to be looking at that later. I will be arguing that not all birds are descended from dinosaurs, and I will also be arguing that most dinosaurian groups and avialae are divided by deep discontinuity. So let's talk about the transitional series. I'd like to represent my opposition correctly. Evolutionists do not believe that chickens are literal descendants of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Rather, they think that they are distant cousins who share a common ancestor. I hope you agree with this, Jackson, and I hope that the people who are listening to this also agree with that statement. However, they also believe that the dinosaur to bird lineage should appear chronologically in the fossil record from very obvious theropods to very obvious birds. And images like the one on the left seem to suggest a clear dinosaur to bird lineage. Now, looking at an image like this, you may be tempted to be convinced by the dinosaur to bird transition. Also, there's images like this one right here, showing a transition from Velociraptor to Gallus gallus, or your modern chicken. Here's another, let me tell you a little bit about this graph. These are kind of dishonest, I think, and you'll be seeing why. I just noticed that the hands on Velociraptor are pronated. I have no idea why. Side subject on that. But you don't know, pictures like this tempt you to be convinced of the dinosaur to bird transition. That's why I like figures like this. They show a phylogenetic tree, and they show, if somebody knows how to read a phylogenetic tree correctly, they'll know that these guys on the top are kind of distantly related to these guys on the bottom. It also shows you the 8 different feather morphotypes, which we'll be talking about later maybe in the conversation. Let me skip through here. Famous transitional fossil in the transitional series is Archaeopteryx. I don't have time to go through all of it. We'll probably visit this later. But there are very bird-like features and very Deinonychosaurian-like features in Archaeopteryx. In fact, this specimen is the 12th specimen of Archaeopteryx, considered to be the oldest, exhibits an ammonite beside it. Possibly Neocheticirrus boas. It causes one to wonder, what would cause a small theropod to be preserved beside an aquatic animal. The scale bar is 10 centimeters. This is from the Rahut Oliver paper, the oldest Archaeopteryx, and you can see the rate sources later. You can pause through. Is Archaeopteryx a good example of a transitional species linking dinosaurs to birds? I don't think so, and here's why. The first theropods appear about 230 million years ago with Eodromius. Paul Sereno has done a lot of research on this guy. You can read what he says about it. First bird appears, apparently the first bird, quote unquote, appears 140 to 150 million years ago. But we don't want the earliest theropod to be the ancestor of the earliest bird, because we're always showed this large theropod dinosaur turning into a bird. So when is our first large theropod? There's where Archaeopteryx appears in the Mesozoic time scale, by the way. The first theropod that we have is I put a Eodromius murphy. This is Allosaurus. This is Allosaurus fragilis, and it appears consecutively alongside, or not consecutively, but looking for a word, but at the same time as Archaeopteryx. And so this is where we have Allosaurus. Allosaurus actually exceeds the Jurassic a little bit. I don't know why I have Archaeopteryx exceeding the Jurassic. Whatever, we'll see later. It gets worse, however, because in 2011, this is Yaotingia zengai, the bird-like theropod that predates Archaeopteryx. It's an Archaeopteryx-like theropod. Here you can see the very bird-like and very dinosaur-like features exhibited in Yaotingia zengai, dinosaur that Jackson presented in his opener. You can see the very bird-like skull, the very bird-like number of cervical vertebrae, the very Deinonychosaurian-like forelimbs, and you can also see that it lacks a keel. It doesn't have a keel. It also has a furcula, which is interesting, a robust furcula according to the authors, Zhu et al. Zhu et al. Also states in this paper, they say, if this new phylogenetic hypothesis can be confirmed by further investigation, current assumptions regarding the avian ancestral condition will need to be re-evaluated. I think so. I'm going to skip a couple of this. I don't have enough time. But there's Zhaotingia in the Mesozoic time scale. It actually predates Archaeopteryx. And Lawrence Whitmer actually wrote that this knocks Archaeopteryx from, quote unquote, its perch. And so I thought that was pretty humorous, pun intended. In 2009, Nature published a paper describing another bird-like theropod that also predates Archaeopteryx. This is Enchiornis, I believe. Yes, this is Enchiornis huxleyi, I think it's pronounced. But it appears before Xiaotiya and even before Allosaurus, I believe. For perspective, you have Compsognathus there, which is the father, I guess, of the Compsognathid group. Here's another questionable one, which won't be a real big crux in my presentation, but in 1991, a paper was published describing a new species of bird that predates Archaeopteryx by some supposed 70 million years. And this is Proteavis, and this isn't to scale. If I were to show Proteavis to you to scale, it would appear far before the Jurassic, and it wouldn't even fit on this screen. I'd have to shrink it down a little bit to show it to you. But all the transitionals that we have aren't really significant to the dinosaur to bird question, because Peter Dotson says this, and he says, quote, "I hasten to add that none of the known small theropods, including Deinonychus, Dromaeosaurus, Velociraptor, Unenlagi, I should have learned how to pronounce that before this, nor Sinosauropteryx, Proto-Archaeopteryx, nor Caudipteryx is itself relevant to the origin of birds. These are all Cretaceous fossils, and as such can at best represent only structural stages through which an avian ancestor may be hypothesized to have passed. The search for the ancestry of birds is a real evolutionary problem," he says. "To maintain that the problem of the origin of birds has been solved when the fossil record of Middle or Late Jurassic bird ancestors is nearly a complete blank is absurd," he says. Even if these do suggest a dinosaur to bird transition, evolutionist logic would say, if Q, then R. This is known as, I believe, deductive reasoning. If Q, then R. R exists, therefore Q logically follows as a matter of fact. This is how it should be phrased, rather. If Q, then R. R exists. We have reason to think Q is true. Let me talk about the next one, time and paradox. How much time do I have left, F17?
Good question. You've got exactly 4 minutes.
Okay, good. So what if Archaeopteryx is not a good example of a missing link from dinosaurs to birds? We have tons of other examples. Here's a couple of examples, and actually a couple of these were actually presented in Jackson's opening. You have Sinornethosaurus, you have Sinocaleopteryx, I believe I pronounced that right, I can't speak today, Enchiornis, Siricornis, Yichi, Bipiosaurus, Microraptor, Caudipteryx, etc. But remember what Dotson said. He says none of these are actually important to the evolutionary story of bird origins. He also says this, personally, I continue to find it problematic that the most bird-like Maniraptoran theropods are found 25 to 75 million years after the origin of birds. Ghost lineages are frankly a contrived solution, a deus ex machina, required by the cladistic method. Of course, it is admitted that late Cretaceous Maniraptorans are not the actual ancestors of birds, only, quote, sister taxa, unquote. Are we being asked to believe that a group of highly derived or rapidly evolving Maniraptorans in the Jurassic gave rise to birds as manifested by Archaeopteryx, and then this highly progressive lineage then went on into a state of evolutionary stasis and persisted unchanged in essential characters for millions of years? Or are actual ancestors far more basal in morphology and harder to classify? If the latter, then why insist that the problem is now solved? Insinuating that the latter has not been found. Now, I'm not saying that Deinonychosaurs are not similar to birds. Here's a Deinonychosaur arm, and I'm very proud of this transition. There's its wing, very, very interesting. This is, I'll deal with it later. But a temporal paradox exists between birds and the theropod dinosaurs, which they supposedly share relatedness. My colleagues may object to say something like, a temporal paradox does not exist between avian aliens and theropods because the above listed theropods are not the exact ancestors of birds, but rather a side branch or sister taxon. But they underestimate one thing. For avian evolution to be true, the fossil record must be, and I'm using Darwin's word, littered with transitional forms from dinosaurs to bird-like dinosaur to dinosaur-like bird to bird. So you're missing the point. And here we have some more time problems, which we'll get into later, hopefully, and I don't know why that's there. Discontinuity and order. Discontinuity and order, the ICC published a paper that with very interesting results and insights into the dinosaur to bird question. Let's look at these results. They say, quote, it is clear that modern birds and dinosaurs group separately, terminologically, but also that some Jurassic and Cretaceous avians grouped with dinosaurs, in the particular Archaeopteryx and Lyell are grouped with Deinonychosauria, suggesting an affinity between
1 minute
and Dromaeosaurus. Thank you. This is what I meant by saying not all birds are not related to dinosaurs. Here's a figure from the paper. I won't be able to show you detail and what this says. So then why are birds so similar to dinosaurs? And I hope to answer this question in a moment. We'll return to this later. Final thoughts. You cannot search for the origin of anything in the fossil record since the layers from the Cambrian to the uppermost Cretaceous were laid down by the flood and do not tell the story of origins. I don't believe, my conclusion is that I don't believe that dinosaurs evolved into birds. So what do I suggest? I suggest that the Bible says that birds were created on day 5. Dinosaurs were probably created on day 6. Can we prove this scientifically? No, I believe no, because, again, the fossil record does not show the story of Genesis 1. Birds do not share relatedness to dinosaurs generically. So that's what I'd like to show you tonight. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, perfect timing. I appreciate that opening statement there, Guzzman. Gentlemen, I appreciate the opening statements. I appreciate the visuals. Thank you for the work put into those opening statements. So that being said, we are now moving into the rebuttal round where we have 10 minutes. And before I hand it to you, Jackson, though, I want to remind everybody in the chat, if you have questions pertaining to the topic for tonight, anybody new here? We've got just over 50 people. So anybody new here, we're debating, did modern birds evolve from non-avian theropod dinosaurs? Tag me with your questions. We've already got some great questions coming in. And also thank you so much for this, the support, the super stickers and the super chat. So Jackson, we are now going to hand it over to you. You have a 10-minute rebuttal. So whenever you are ready, the floor is yours and I can start the timer.
All right. Well, as for the random pattern, it isn't so random. From my presentation, it seems to be pretty direct, and then it branches off from dinosaur-like birds to bird-like dinosaurs in the Cretaceous from the Jurassic. Let's see. Archaeopteryx may not be the ancestor of birds. It may be a sister group, but its feathers were more derived than some of the other ones. It had asymmetrical feathers with most of the modern characteristics of a bird feather, and it had a keel, a small keel, but a keel nonetheless. And you said Allosaurus and Archaeopteryx lived alongside each other, which is true in the Jurassic, but that doesn't mean that they didn't come from dinosaurs. It just means they lived alongside each other. Interestingly, Allosaurus actually had air sacs and kind of a similar lung structure, as evidenced by spaces in its vertebrae. So they had a similar lung structure to birds, even Allosaurus. Similarities between Zaltinia and Archaeopteryx. You said Zaltinia had no keel, which is true, while Archaeopteryx did have a keel. And used a quote from the 2000 and 2001, I think, saying they had Cretaceous fossils, but no Jurassic fossils. That's not true anymore. There are a lot of them. Siricornis, Eosinopterix, Eosinopterix, they're all Jurassic. And they're all dinosaurs that have feathers, and apparently we're on the way to becoming birds. And as for being littered with transitional fossils, in the Maniraptor group to the basal birds I was showing, there are 150 genera, and new feathered dinosaurs are being discovered every year, especially out of China, the Taojian Formation. So that's pretty much all I have to say. I think those were most of your, if not all the points. All I wrote down anyway. So.
All right, short and sweet. That's 7 minutes we can add to either the discussion or the audience Q&A. So, guys, again, as always, the debate continues into the audience Q&A. So tag me with your questions. And Guzzman, we are going to hand it over to you. You have a 10-minute rebuttal whenever you're ready. If you need to share a screen or anything like that as well, let me know. And go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'd like to go back to Jackson's opening. He brought up another taxa. If I counted correctly, I believe he brought up 20 from Siricornis to Wulong. I believe Wulong was your last taxa that he presented. Some of these are Cretaceous taxa. Some of these are Jurassic. There's nothing really I can really say about the opening presentation other than that. Your argument seems to be mostly based on morphology. You have dinosaur characteristics, features on birds, animals that are classified as birds. Bird features that are on animals that are classified as non-avian dinosaurs, and then you have basal birds, and then derived dinosaurs, and so on and so forth. Zhaotingia, yes, Zhaotingia, you brought up Zhaotingia, Siricornis, Kaihong, Anchiornis. I might have spelled this wrong. Eosinopterix, Archaeopteryx, Protopteryx, Sapiornis, Confuciusornis, Longipteryx, Longisipterus. I've never heard of that one. I'll have to look it up later. Sul Tavis, I believe. Zhuanlong. I can't speak. Zhuanlong. Tianyu. Microraptor, Eutyrannus, Dilong, Changi Raptor, and Wulong. We could go through one of these one by one. We don't have enough time to, though. I think we'll just go into the open discussion. I don't think I have any other comments other than that. Some of the taxa that were presented, most of these, some of these were from the Cretaceous. There are a couple that I'm not aware of, which may have been from Cretaceous, from Jurassic. I'm not sure. Yichi, I know, is from Jurassic. Zhaotingia is Jurassic. Kaihong is Jurassic, I believe. You did bring up Microraptor, which is Cretaceous. Eutyrannus, which I believe is also Jurassic, but it has nothing to do with the dinosaur to bird transition. I believe you only brought that up to show feathers on dinosaurs. But we'll get into that during the discussion period. So that'll be the end of my rebuttal. Thank you.
All right, I appreciate that rebuttal, Guzzman. Gentlemen, Jackson and Guzzman, thank you so much for your opening statements and your rebuttals. We've got a lot of good points and a lot of good specific examples to discuss here in the dialogue portion of the debate. I've got roughly 50 minutes on the clock. I will add some of the time not used to the discussion, and then the remaining time to the audience Q&A. So as always, we like to keep these discussions as equally timed as possible, sticking to one topic at a time. Jonathan just ended with his 10-minute rebuttal. So Jackson, we're going to hand it over to you to start us off in the discussion portion with the first question. And of course, if there's some points that you wanted to make. So gentlemen, I will moderate as needed, but you're both cordial and respectful and professional. So it shouldn't require too much moderating. So gentlemen, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Yeah, not like your debate last night. That got pretty heated.
You're right about that, Jackson.
Yeah, Eutyrannus was actually early Cretaceous also. But okay. From Siricornis up to, up to Yi, it was Jurassic.
Okay. Adding that. Cool. Archaeopteryx is also Jurassic.
Jurassic, yeah.
Okay. Cool. And so everything after that, is that all Cretaceous? I
think
know.
everything after that's Cretaceous.
Is Dylon Cretaceous?
Actually, Dylon is early Cretaceous, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Just wanted to make sure of that. So I'm willing to answer questions now.
Yeah. All right, let me see. So you believe that dinosaurs did have feathers, obviously.
Yes. Yes, sir. I did. I do believe that some dinosaurs were plumed.
What do you expect we should find that we haven't already found in the fossils that I've presented?
What do I think we should find?
Yeah.
I think that we should find, that's an interesting question. I think that we should find a clear transition from a obvious theropod to quite an obvious bird. Now, we do have fossils that are classified within Avialae, I believe, in the Jurassic. So that would you would consider that to be the origin of the birds in the Jurassic, sometime in the middle Jurassic, which is kind of dumb because there's no middle Jurassic, but whatever. So you have the origin of birds happening in the Jurassic. I'd like to see enough time and enough transitions within that time to lead from theropod dinosaur to Avialae within the middle Jurassic.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Let's see. You go ahead and ask me a question now. Let's do that.
Okay, cool. You said that, back to your rebuttal, I believe. Yeah, this is your rebuttal. You said that Archaeopteryx had a keel. Do you have a? I don't think that's accurate. Do you have a source for that? I may be wrong on
that. I don't have one on me, but it does have a very weak keel. But it did evidently have flight muscles and was able to fly to some extent, at least.
Right. Yeah, because I'm not aware of Archaeopteryx having a keel. I've not examined every single specimen. I believe that it's standing for truth left, but I don't have. I don't have. I haven't examined every single specimen, but I don't. I'm not aware of there being a keel on Archaeopteryx. Anyway, you also said Allosaurus had air sacs, and
yes,
I'm very much aware of that. Allosaurus, as well as a lot of other theropods, did have air sacs. They were basal and primitive, of course. They weren't like the ones that we have in birds today. They were a basal, primitive form of those. But if we're going to use that as evidence, you also have to look at sauropods, who also had air sacs within the cervical vertebrae, I believe. Actually, I think along all their vertebrae, they had air sacs, and
that's
so
true.
I don't think that that's necessarily impactful. I think it does. It does highlight. I will admit that it does highlight the similarity between dinosaur and bird. But like I said in my opener, I don't disagree with with saying that dinosaurs are birds or that dinosaurs are similar to birds. So
yeah. Well, I think with sauropods, the fact that alone they have a bird-like respiration system isn't evidence in itself that they evolved into birds. If there were a bunch of sauropods suddenly becoming bipedal and showing up with feathers, maybe you can make that argument. But it seems to be theropods.
Right.
And Alan Fiducia, who is skeptical, one of the few scientists now who is skeptical of the theropod link, thinks they originate from archosaurs further back.
Right.
But there's not really a lot of evidence for that either. So I think if you're going to go with a line, it would have to be theropods.
Yeah, I think Fiducia thinks that it came from birds came from. I think it's a dinosauromorph. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah.
But it's one of those small quadrupeds that have like some sort of primitive plumage. It's a really interesting animal. I will. But anyway, so unless you have any other questions for me, I'd like to go back to my opening and look at a couple of things that I have written down here.
You can do that.
So when we are talking about Archaeopteryx and whatnot, we say, or I was always taught, and I have books in my library that have the phrases like Archaeopteryx is the...
Actually, Guzzman, real quick, I just want to remind you guys, I am backstage moderating. I'm just gathering questions. You guys are doing great. If either one of you want to share screen, just know I'm there. Let me know. Cue me, and I'll share screen for you. Okay, guys? So keep it up. Good job.
All right.
Okay, cool. I have books in my library which state things like Archaeopteryx was the first bird. Archaeopteryx is like the mother of all birds, rather. Excuse me. And I know that science is always, pun intended, evolving, and it's always changing. But do you think that we were too dogmatic back then when we were saying that Archaeopteryx is the mother of all birds, or that Archaeopteryx was the first bird?
Well, to say it's possibly the first bird is not. I mean, if you're going to say birds definitely evolved from this one species, yeah, I would say that's a stretch. You're probably never going to know exactly what species it was, but you can tell from an abundance of fossil evidence that this is close to what would be the ancestor, if it's not the ancestor, something like that.
Right. Okay. So you asked me a question.
Let me think. Let me go back to some notes. So again, about the Cretaceous fossils, you think it's an issue that theropods, clearly large theropods, were still having feathers alongside basal birds in the late Cretaceous and mid Cretaceous, even early Cretaceous?
Do I find it as a problem?
Yeah.
No. First of all, I don't think that the Cretaceous and Jurassic periods are periods of time. I think that they're geologic formations and orders in which the geologic record was organized, the rock record was organized. But do I think that it's a problem to find, you said, theropods in the Cretaceous with feathers alongside birds? If I do, is that problematic for me or problematic for you? Is that what you're asking?
Either way, I guess. Okay,
so if it's problematic for me, no, I don't think that there's a problem saying that theropod dinosaurs had feathers. Tyrannus, as you mentioned, had some sort of plumage, some sort of morphotype. I haven't really researched it. It's some sort of plume. Of course, you have within Deinonychosauria, you have a lot of Deinonychosaurs having feathers. You have Microraptor, not Dromaeosaurus, but Velociraptor, and these all have plumage. Now, is it problematic for the evolutionist to find theropod dinosaurs with feathers? No, I don't think that's inherently no, because, I mean, thinking as an evolutionist, I think you could say that feathers evolved prior to the Cretaceous and then just diverged within that time period.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a tree. It's not a linear progression. So to see animals that have characteristics like this alongside each other isn't a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here, let me ask you a question real quick.
Okay.
Okay, I think it's right here. So when we have, what do you think of? I'm gonna share my screen, SFT, just so you know. When you have figures like this is just let me know when you can see it. Here we go. When we have figures like this, what do you think of something like this? This is from the Darwin et al. Paper from the International Conference on Creationism in 2018. They show here, I'm going to magnify in. Tell me if you can see this, because I haven't ever tested.
Yeah,
can you see you see magnification, right?
Yeah, I can make it out.
Okay, so here you have your out group. This is 0.1, I believe. Your out group, or not point one. This is point one. But your outgroup here, you have Dilong, the Spletosaurus, Tarbosaurus, etc. Raptor, Allosaurus. In group one, you have Sinosauropteryx, I believe. I just changed slide. Compsognathus, and Ornitholestes, Haussignathus, I believe, is how you pronounce it. Here you have Shuvia and something else, Haplochirus. Grouping in 2D, you have 3, you have Gallimimus, Ornithomimus, etc. And I think you can see where I'm going with this. You have different groupings and different taxes grouping separately. And so you see here you have pretty noticeable discontinuity between the groups. And this is based on phylogenetic graphings from like Brusati et al. 2014, I believe, etc. If there was a clear evolutionary progression from theropod dinosaur to bird, you would expect to be a clear progression from 1 to 2A to 2B, 2C, 2D, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? But you don't see that. You don't see that. You have 1, 2D, 3, and then 4, and then 2C, 2A, 2B, and then 5 and 6. 6, by the way, is your extant birds. And so you have this group here. What is this? Eosinopterix? I have no idea what that is. Anyway, you have Confuciusornis, Archaeopteryx, Siricornis, and Geolornis. I know how to pronounce that, but I can't speak to it. Grouping quite distantly from modern avian. So how would an evolutionist interpret results like this? Is my question.
Well, I'm not great with phylogenetic trees. I'll just be honest with you. So, but chronologically, it seems to make some sense. Obviously, there are more fossils to be found, and there are new ones found every year. So, I mean, the quote from 2000, there were no Jurassic fossils known, and now we have several genera known of feathered theropods from the Jurassic. So I think it's going to get more clear as we go on. Or with more fossils, it might get less clear. It can have that effect sometimes. So
okay. So that's kind of like Darwin's approach to it. He said that why don't we find these numerous transitional forms within the fossil record, and it's because of the incompleteness of the fossil record. So that's kind of the same response. That's interesting. That was my question. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, it's similar to what Darwin said, except when Darwin was alive, there was not one transitional fossil known until a couple years after he said that.
2 years.
Or 3. Yeah, I think 2. When Archaeopteryx was found.
Archaeopteryx was 1960 or 1861.
Yeah, that's right.
Darwin's book was 59.
Yeah.
So yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm a nerd.
Yeah, and I know all the dates too. I'm terrible at coming up with questions. I should really have some pre-made questions thought of before debates. But
well, let me jump in here, guys, because you guys are having a great discussion so far. Lots of great points kind of being discussed and addressed. Given the topic of the debate, did modern birds evolve from non-avian theropod dinosaurs? We have, Jackson's model or position that would say yes, while Guzzman would put forth a separate ancestry model and answer that question with a no. Since Guzzman asked the last question, Jackson, why don't we hand it to you to kind of go over what you believe is the number one issue or problem with Guzzman's position, a problem, I guess, so great that you feel would give you as the affirmative tonight, the stronger position, and that way you meeting your burden of proof. Yeah. What would be, you think, the biggest problem on Guzzman's side? And then we'll allow Guzzman to, give what he believes is the biggest problem for your side. And that way we can have the audience kind of decide objectively, what they feel is the better position. So go ahead, Jackson.
Well, for a creationist and an evolutionist, we're pretty close to agreeing, as close as you can be, I think, me and Guzzman, on a topic like this.
Yeah.
But my biggest problem goes back to his opening, where He says there are none in the Jurassic, which there are. That's really the only thing I can think of.
Okay. So if that's what you feel is the biggest problem for Guzzman's model, Guzzman, do you find that to be a problem? How would you respond? Go ahead.
Sure. I'm writing it down real quick. So, I want to make sure I'm unmuted. There we go. I'm unmuted. Cool. The fact that there are fossils that seem to transition from theropod dinosaur to feathered bird in the Jurassic, I would like to see enough time present between the transition, because if I can, let me just share my screen one more time real quick, standing. I skipped over this in my opener. I just like to present this really quick. I believe it's this slide right here. Okay, so this is from a 2010 paper, I believe, 2008. 2008. This paper shows waiting for two mutations with applications to regulatory sequence evolution and the limits of Darwinian evolution. It says that for a couple, I believe it was two beneficial mutations, simple beneficial mutations, for fruit flies to develop two beneficial mutations, and for those mutations to become fixed in a population, it would take a few million years at least. For humans, they calculated that would take at least 200 million years. Now, where would dinosaurs fall in between the spectrum of fruit flies with their large generation time, or speedy generation times and large population sizes, and humans with their smaller populations and slower reproduction times, generation times? Where would dinosaurs fit into this, and then how would that be enough time for the dinosaur to bird transition to take place? I think that's probably the biggest issue between for dinosaur to bird evolution, and it's the time. There's not enough time. Even if you have a couple million years between the earliest theropod and the earliest bird, you still don't have enough time. It's still not enough. And so I'd like to see how somebody would respond to that. How do we respond to the answer of time?
All right, I appreciate that, Guzzman. So essentially, that's the waiting time problem. Not enough time to evolve the true anatomical novelties and genetic novelties as well to take a theropod-like dinosaur or a non-avian theropod dinosaur into a modern bird. Would that be reiterating it accurately, Guzzman? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, Jackson, how would you respond? What are your thoughts? That's a differentiating line of evidence that Guzzman has presented that he thinks is a major problem for your model. Go ahead, floor is yours. How would you respond? What are your thoughts?
Well, that kind of goes back to individuals don't evolve, populations do. While an individual will have 100 to 200 mutations per generation, let's say they have one beneficial mutation out of those. We go to a population of 100 million, and each one of those is going to have, say every other one has a beneficial mutation. That's 50 million beneficial mutations in a single generation. So if my math is right, and it may be wrong because I'm terrible at math, but so I think that's a good answer to it. I was reading about that last night, so I'm glad I read that.
Okay, so it's your position or rebuttal that there really isn't a waiting time problem, Jackson?
Not so much, no. And you do have several million years between several of these species.
Okay,
go ahead. I would like to respond by saying that the time difference between some of these species is the same time difference for a single species lifetime. For a single species lifetime, I think is what it's called. Just like 10 million years, I think, is the biggest difference, I think, between the theropods that would even come close to being related to the nearest ancestor of avialans and avialans itself. And so you have 10 million years, I believe, or 15 million years or less which is a single species lifetime between the two. So I don't think there's a whole lot of time there, even if you have beneficial mutations becoming fixed within populations. I don't think there's enough time there. And I could be wrong.
Go ahead, Jackson. What are your thoughts? How would you respond to that?
I was reading the side chat. Let me see if I caught that. Sorry. Kind of reiterate it for me.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
The time between.
Okay, I remember.
Yeah.
From Siricornis to like Protopteryx, there's a 35 million year period. So from that to that, there's a good amount of time, and it's likely that Siricornis is, and it's almost guaranteed that Siricornis is not the first feathered theropod. So we probably have more time than that to get to the first basal birds. And even at the basal birds, they still have some dinosaur traits, teeth, and unfused digits, and things like that. So that would be my reply. So
then when would the basalmost bird come into play? Because we know that Siricornis, 160 million years ago, Protopteryx is 130 million years. That's a 30 million year span. But you're saying that Siricornis is not the first feathered dinosaur. So when is that first feathered dinosaur? And then when is the first bird? Because that could be where we have the problem.
That's a good point. They could find an earlier basal bird, but they likely will find a later feathered theropod as well, but probably not too much out of the 10 million year range. I would just guess.
Right. All right.
Okay, let me jump in here and get another question in there that I think would be good, that you guys obviously have touched on, but for the audience sake as well, I think this will be appropriate in giving them the most information possible to come to an objective conclusion as to whose position is stronger. So, Jackson, given the title, did modern birds evolve or come from non-avian theropod-like dinosaurs? What would you say is the best differentiating line of evidence, not an agnostic line of evidence, to the debate and to the positions? What would be your best differentiating line of evidence to demonstrate the validity of your affirmative tonight, and pretend you were presenting this evidence to a completely objective audience, an audience that's on the fence, and therefore this line of evidence that you would present would be hopefully convincing to them from your position? Go ahead, Jackson.
Well, without using fossils, I would go to genetics. You can get chicken embryo to develop teeth, unfused digits, and even a tail, a long bony tail today. Usually the embryo will die, obviously, but the genes are there to make these things. So that would be what I would say.
All right. Well, why don't we hand it over to Guzzman? I appreciate that response and answer, Jackson. Guzzman, what are your thoughts on that, and how would you like to respond?
Before I respond to the question, I'd like to say this, that it's also been shown that embryonic crocodilians, I believe, have developed proto feathers, and so it's kind of like a nothing burger to me. It's kind of like whatever. I mean, it's cool. That's all it is. But anyway, the question was, did modern birds evolve from non-avian theropod dinosaurs? How would I answer that question? What would be the best evidence that I would give for my position, right?
Yeah. So if you're okay with the way you answered Jackson's, I guess, number one line of evidence that he would present to an objective audience, Guzzman, let's do the same with you. Given the fact that you would say no, your position would be no to the debate topic in question for tonight. Let's say you had a completely objective audience, an audience that's all on the fence when it comes to this question. What do you believe is the best line of evidence that you could present them to show them that no, we're looking at special creation, separate ancestry, and a no to the question, did modern birds evolve from non-avian theropod dinosaurs? Go ahead, Guzzman.
So I would say that the answer to the question is complicated. I don't believe that all dinosaurs or that all birds did not come from dinosaurs. According to terminological analyses, some probably did. But I do believe that there's deep discontinuity between the two groups, modern aves and theropod, non-avian dinosaurs. What would be the best evidence for special creation in that case? I think that the fact that we have discontinuity even in the fossil record, you have pretty deep discontinuity. The McLean 2018 paper, Feathered Dinosaurs Reconsidered, showed deep discontinuity between avialans and theropod dinosaurs. However, they did show that Archaeopteryx kind of got mixed up in there and doesn't really know what it's doing in there, and so it's kind of weird. Archaeopteryx is kind of weird, and we don't really know where it lies at this point. Some say it's a bird, some say it's a dinosaur. I'm kind of leaning more towards the dinosaur interpretation, but it's all based. That's all it is, interpretation. But what's my best evidence? And that's discontinuity exists between the two groups. Such deep discontinuity and not really clear transition. You don't have a really clear transition. Again, you have a lot of feathered dinosaurs, and you have a lot of dinosaur-like birds. You have Archaeopteryx, which has derived, I guess you could say, theropod features, and it also has some bird features that are also very well developed. Doesn't look transitional. It looks like the feathers were made for flight. It looks like the teeth were made for eating whatever it was eating. I think actually one paleontologist from the 70s put it that the lower the mandible of the Archaeopteryx is actually a great example of he said what did he say? He said mosaic evolution, and so. My evidence is that there's not really a lot of good evidence to suggest the transition. And then my evidence is also that there's deep discontinuity and not enough transition.
All right, I appreciate that, Guzzman. If I were to reiterate, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying and looking to the deep discontinuities in fossil species, fossil dinosauria, discovered through baraminology. And these discontinuities in these baraminology-related analyses would indicate separate ancestry in these groups rather than universal ancestry, which would be Jackson's position.
Correct.
Okay. So Jackson, the universal versus separate ancestry debate here, the two different positions. What are your thoughts, and how would you address these discontinuities indicating more of a separate ancestry rather than a universal ancestry when it comes to Dinosauria? Go ahead.
Well, I don't think there's such a huge discontinuity, but I guess a counter question to that would be, how many transitions would it take before the line is proven? Would it be 100 or 1,000, somewhere in between or more? That's really all I have to say.
I can answer that if you'd like, standing real quick. How many transitions would there have to be? In order to fulfill Darwin's prediction that he made in The Origin of Species, he said the fossil record has to be littered with these transitions. And I think, I'm not sure what number he gave in the book, but he gave a really big number. He said, I think thousands and thousands of transitions must exist in order for his theory to be true. Or why are there not then thousands and thousands of these transitions? And so that's how many transitions would there have to be? I think there should be enough where it'd be clear that we could look and say, hey guys, there's a clear transition. Here's a theropod non-avian dinosaur with feathers, panaceous feathers, proto-feathers, plumulaceous feathers, some sort of other millions of years. Let's give the number just for whatever, 20 million years before our first bird. And then between those 20 million years, you have a very clear transition. You have other fossils that are from the same area or show a geographic divergence, and in case of two taxa are in different locations or whatnot, and this would show a clear transition. I don't think we have that. We don't have a clear transition from something to Archaeopteryx, and then showing if that's something that Archaeopteryx came from, lived somewhere else. We don't have a clear geographic transition. Also, it's not just fossil transition. You need geographic transitions and whatnot. And so I don't think we have that. If I'm aware, and I'm like I've said in the beginning, I'm not aware of a lot of the fossils that there are. That's completely fine.
Go ahead, Jackson. How would you respond?
Well, I left out a few of them in the late Jurassic line, like Arornis is the one I can think of. I think there was another one or two. But I've actually been cataloging what I would consider transitional fossils lately, not necessarily just in the bird line, but I've come up with a number of about 2,500 genera mostly, but some species also. So it probably translates to 3,000 or 4,000 species.
I just looked up sorry.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I just looked up Arornis, and it shows that it's within Anchiornithidae, which
the same family.
Yeah, that's Anchiornis, Zhaoting, etc. That's a non-avian group, if I'm not mistaken.
There's also Eosinopterix, a couple others.
But it's very bird-like, and I'll say this: if anybody looks it up, if you were to see this thing flying around in the sky one day, you would look at that and say, "Oh, that's a bird." I would. But looking at a reconstruction, I don't know who made this. It might not be accurate. It looks like it has separate digits with claws at the end. That's a very theropod-like. That's a very theropod-like feature, not one exhibited in birds. So there are mixed features there, which would seem to prove a transition. But there still needs to be like a clear transition from 3 fingers merging into one within the bird line. We do have some dinosaurs with 2 digits. Tyrannosaurus rex is an example. The Tyrannosauroids are examples. And then you have some with 1 digit. I think Mononicus is the one with 1 digit. But those 2 are not within the bird lineage. Those are sister taxa. And so what Peter Dodson said, you could only hope, you can only hypothesize that those were the routes that avialians had taken for evolution to occur. And so you need transitions there. It's kind of like the problem that you have with whale evolution, kind of. It's kind of like, all right, you have nostrils being at the end of the snouts of these basal whales, and then it goes up the snouts and up to between the eyes, and it's like, that's kind of crazy. It wouldn't be so crazy if there was evidence for it, and I'm not really seeing it. So that's kind of where I'm getting hung up on.
Well, for whales, there are the protocoetid whales have an intermediate nostril halfway up the snout, and there are about a dozen or so species of protocoetids. But for 2 digits that are fused, that's in the basal bird line, the more when they have a pygostyle and when they look more like birds than dinosaurs, that's when their digits start to fuse. There are a few of those with 2 digits that are fused and 1 hanging off. I should have probably included 1. I didn't. I can't name it, but there are a couple of them that I saw that have that characteristic.
And I'm pretty sure there are. As I said, I don't know all of the specimens that there are, and I'm pretty sure there are. But I'd like to get back to this, since we're agreeing a lot. We're agreeing a lot, right? I think you can feel that. I think dinosaurs are feathered. You think dinosaurs are feathered. Al, I even think that birds are. You think that birds are classified as dinosaurs, and I'm frozen a little bit. Okay.
No, you're not anymore.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, you just froze for about 5 seconds, Guzzman. If you want to go back, I think you were asking him if he believes that birds would taxonomically be categorized as dinosaurs, but you did cut out for 5 seconds. If you wanted to reiterate,
I was saying we just agree a lot. I'd like to know where we disagree, and then why we disagree. And I think one obvious place is that birds came from dinosaurs. Why do we disagree on that?
Good question. Jackson, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We're just one's a creationist, one believes in evolution. How we came to those beliefs, or accepted the scientific consensus, or didn't, or
so that,
I mean, it's a hard question to answer, I guess.
Sir, that's an interesting point that you make, and one that I was not expecting. I would never expect that in a million years, to be quite frank, out of somebody. One is a creationist and one is an evolutionist. So do you think that it's possible to look at these lines of data and then interpret them differently, and then both solutions could be equally reasonable, such as what we're doing here?
Well, I don't think there's really much of a way of interpreting it, but as creationist goes, you're as close to my position as you can get, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
Well, let me ask this then. Okay, so for what I'm gathering here in a really great technical and I would say sophisticated conversation, well worth a re-listen, rewatch. While you both agree that the evidence does indeed suggest, and I know this is controversial, but you at least both agree that the evidence would suggest that feathered dinosaur fossils do in fact exist. But the analyses that Guzzman's pointing to, done through baraminology, indicate multiple different created kinds of non-avian dinosaurs. Correct me if I'm wrong, Guzzman. I believe Dr. Matthew McLean has suggested more than 8.
Other dinosaurs, yes. I think that was McLean et al. 2018. They say that at least 8 different kinds within feathered dinosaurs.
Right. So that being said then, and going back to kind of the topic of the debate and Jackson's affirmative here, Guzzman, can you briefly explain why this may or may not be a major problem for Jackson's model that he is putting forth here? And then we can allow Jackson to respond, because it's always good to discuss agnostic lines of evidence, right? The sky is blue, therefore evolution. The sky is blue, therefore creation. But here's the thing. Both creation and evolution can explain why the sky is blue. So this evidence and data points, this may indeed be a differentiating line of evidence in favor of the separate ancestry model being proposed by Guzzman. Do you believe that that's the case, Guzzman? And can you kind of go into that a little bit more, and then we'll get some of Jackson's thoughts on that.
So the question is if the let me try to phrase it correctly. Try to rephrase it real quick and
sure, yeah. So you guys were discussing feathered dinosaurs, and you both would agree that the data or the evidence that we currently have does suggest, and I understand this is controversial among creationists, but the evidence, you guys would agree, suggests that feathered dinosaur fossils do exist. But Guzzman, you're pointing to the baraminological analyses that have been done by creationists, suggesting that there are at least 8 different kinds of non-avian dinosaurs, created kinds, which would mean we're looking at a separate ancestry rather than a universal ancestry, which Jackson would be putting forth. So do you believe, Guzzman, that that's a differentiating line of evidence rather than an agnostic line of evidence in this debate to help answer this question and resolve the topic of the night, Guzzman?
I think it would depend, because I think that evolutionists would also expect to see discontinuity between dinosaurian groups. They would also, and if they were to be creationists, they would probably also, or let me not say creationists, if they were also to use baraminology, they would also have no problem with grouping different dinosaurs within their kind or and so there's Is it a differentiating line of evidence? And I would think I'd be conditioned to say yes. Evolutionists would not predict discontinuity between the groups. But then I also have to say no because they do. But then I also have to think again because they also think that there should be there's not a convergence, but a divergence there that happened at some point in the late distant past. The fact that we don't know where that divergence is, and we cannot see that within terminological analyses, would also be problematic. So the answer to the question would be yes. I think it would be problematic for the evolutionists.
So would you say, and then we're going to hand it to you, Jackson, to have plenty of time to respond, because I think this is getting to the meat of the debate itself, where we've now discussed the agnostic lines of evidence that you both kind of agree, okay, we agree with this data, but it doesn't really contradict our held to models. Now, if these data points really are a differentiating way to kind of answer this question of ancestry, Guzzman, if it comes down to the law of parsimony, right? What's the most parsimonious explanation? So, okay, Jackson and his position may be able to kind of explain the discontinuities. What model best explains it? Right? What model best explains these deep discontinuities? And Guzzman, you would be proposing the separate ancestry model. Best explains it.
Right. I do think that the separate ancestry does best explain the phenomenological analysis that we see. I'd like to share my screen really quickly one last time,
Sure.
but it may not be the last time.
No worries.
Let me
still
just show
got
you. We have a couple minutes.
Actually, okay, this is perfect, Guzzman. You read my mind. Let's give a visual now, because a lot of what we're saying here might be kind of technical.
It's very abstract for some people.
Yeah. So why don't you take a couple minutes, go over through visual form, through even Dr. McLean's paper, if you'd like to, demonstrating these points, and then Jackson, we're going to give you ample time to respond, give your thoughts, and we'll go from there. Go ahead, Guzzman.
Okay, so here you have Theropod, or not Theropod, but this is your Solarasaurians down to your avialians. This is from the Bussati paper in 2014, I believe. Yep, 2014. So you have up here Tyrannosauridae. I almost said Tyrannosauroidea. This is Tyrannosauroidea up here. You have down to your avialians and so on and so forth. And so you would expect to see discontinuity, which you do here. This does kind of illustrate the discontinuity between groups. The fact that we can even graph this shows that there's discontinuity between groups. And so, but would this show an evolutionary transition? I think a lot of people look at this and then they just say, yeah, obviously. Look at them. It's going from big to small to down smaller. It's obviously a transition. But what you have to keep in mind is that these lines, let me get my pointer out real quick. Tell me if you can see my pointer standing. I'm going to pull up you see that red dot?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So, but we don't have, you see these branches here that connect, let's say, AVLA to, there's a mosquito in my face, sorry, to Dromaeosauridae. You see, there's this one branch here that connects the two, right? And this would seem to suggest an evolutionary affinity. However, there's no data here. There is no data in these branches that connects AVLA to your Dromaeosaurids. Same thing with Dromaeosauridae and there's an Assauridae down here in Maniraptor. These are abstract lines. These are just lines on paper. There's no data for that to represent this connection. These are interpretations of the data, interpretations of the features that are present on these dinosaurs, which ones look more bird-like than dinosaur-like, and then they just connect them. It's really just subjective. Some will disagree and say, well, it's not subjective. It kind of is, though, guys. Fine. And you have these lines, but there's no real data connecting these lines. These are just interpretations of the data. These ends are really what are important. These ends of the lines, these are what are important. But everything that connects them doesn't exist. And so if you were to remove the lines, that connect the taxa, what would you be left with? And I saw this excellent figure. If you were to erase all the lines, let's imagine for a second we erase every single line that connects every single taxa here. What are you left with? You're left with the time scale, essentially. And you're left with taxa appearing abruptly with no precursors. They appear independently and abruptly. And that's okay. That the data does not contradict this interpretation. So I'm not disagreeing with this phylogenetic analysis. I would just erase the lines that connect everything and just say, hey, we're good here now. I mean, you have independent ancestry here. Now, obviously, you're going to have some groups where it's kind of obvious that two groups are related together, and you can actually do that like a tree there. For example, this tree here at the end of Ornithomimosauria, you have Gallimimus and Ornithomimus, Struthiomimus, and Quiplung, Ansermimus, etc. Anybody who knows any of these taxa knows that they're very, very similar to each other, so you could probably group these together in their own tree. But these big lines here that connect Maniraptor forms to Siricornis, from Tyrannosauroids and Parapes, there's no data there. And so instead of there being a tree of life, instead of there not even being a bush of life, you have a time scale with abrupt appearances of taxa. And that's all you have. And that's what we would expect in a creationist model.
Okay, so you're saying that that they appear independently and abruptly, which you are then saying as a conclusion that this would best be explained by independent origins and separate ancestry rather than Jackson's position. So that being the case, Jackson, I know there were a lot of points there. So why don't you kind of give your thoughts and rebuttal to that, and take as much time as you need, Jackson. Go ahead.
Well, I think it's logical to say that all the theropods would be related to each other. But so I think the cladogram makes sense in that regard. But to say everything appeared abruptly and there's no middle part to where they diverged. If you look to the Triassic, they're archosaurs. Then the Upper Triassic, they're dinosaurs like Chilosaurus, which seems to have traits of theropods, sauropods, ceratopsian dinosaurs, and it seems to be a transition for all of those in that sense. It led to all of them coming about. But yeah, that's basically my answer to that. It's not that long, but yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that response, Jackson. Guzzman, how do you feel about his response? Do you feel like it adequately answered the data you presented that you believe is best explained by separate ancestry and independent origins?
I'd like to go through the two claims that he made. He said that all theropods are related, so it would make sense that you have this branching, and so you could safely assume that Theropoda, or not Theropoda, good night, AVLA and, say, Tyrannosauroids obviously share an evolutionary affinity, so the tree makes sense. It's an assumption that all Theropoda is related. Theropoda is a very diverse group. Dinosauria in and of itself is, people don't realize this, but it's a very diverse group. Some look bulkier, some look more bird-like. It's a very diverse group. To suggest that all theropods are all related, I can't agree to that. I don't think I could ever agree to that. There's just too much. I was gonna say that there's too much discontinuity between the two, but here's what I will say. It could be possible that all of Theropoda is related, because we don't know how God created it. We know what he created, and we know more or less how he created but we don't know how exactly. He creates different groups, different baramins of theropods that all share very similar genetic information, very similar phenotypes, very similar features, and so on and so forth. And so when we plot these cladograms and phylogenetic trees and we say, oh, well, these two guys are really similar and they're supposedly different families, or some creationists would even consider them to be different kinds, we would say, hey, they might be related. Like God put different diversity, and he could have put genes in there that resemble each other, and by that sense, they would be related, I guess. But did one come from the other? And I know that's a dumb question to ask, but did the two share a recent common ancestor? We don't know. And I don't know. I can't answer to you and say to you that all Theropoda shares a common ancestor. I don't think it does. It'd be weird if it did. I don't think so. But the second claim that you made was that there are transitions for dinosaurs in the Triassic. There's animals in the Triassic that resemble ceratopsians and theropods, and I understand that. It gets messy when you get to the Triassic, when you get to the ancestors of dinosaurs, even in the before the Mesozoic, it gets kind of messy. Eoraptor, for example, is a dinosaur. It's considered to be, if my memory serves, I believe it's considered to be, you know what, I'm not even going to make the claim because I don't even know what it is. I'm sorry?
It's hard to tell with that one. I know the one
Right.
you're talking about.
Coelophysis, though, I think is considered to be the ancestor or sister taxa of sauropods, which is kind of weird because it looks very theropod-like. And actually, I just remember this. The figure that I presented at the very end of my presentation shows a coelophysis into a bird, which is kind of ridiculous because even evolutionary paleontologists would say that coelophyses are closer. Coelophyses are more closely related to sauropods than they are to theropods. I just realized that. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I'm a nerd, so I'm gonna keep on going down rabbit trails. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Unless Jackson has anything else to say, I really love the discussion. And if we all agree, we can probably go into the Q&A now.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. Believe it or not, the 50 minutes just ran out. 50 minutes has flown by. But to be fair, Jackson, since Guzzman did bring up some points there, feel free to kind of wrap up your thoughts right now in terms of the discussion, Jackson. Then we'll do some short closing statements. Then we'll get in some questions from the audience.
I don't really have anything to add, just a fun discussion. So let's get to the questions.
Okay. Guzzman, did you have any concluding remarks? Any way you kind of want to wrap this up, wrap up the debate itself? We did agree to 5-minute closing statements, so I'd recommend utilizing them just to kind of, demonstrate to the audience as to how you feel the debate went, and if you guys kind of met your burden of proof for the day. Yeah, no worries. So why don't we start with you, Jackson? We'll give you the floor for your 5-minute closing statement. Of course, you don't have to use it all, but go ahead. Go ahead, Jackson.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. It's not going to take 5 minutes, but yeah, I think there's sufficient fossil evidence to say that theropods evolved into birds, and technically birds are still theropods if you go by that. But yeah, this debate was fun. Probably the most fun debate out of all of them, I think, honestly. Hang on a second. Window popped up. Jonathan's very knowledgeable. He's told me he was only 15 years old, so that's impressive. So, just keep researching, and whatever conclusion you make, I respect it. So that's my closing statement.
All right, Jackson, I appreciate that, and I do agree. This was a fantastic discussion. I would say probably the best on this topic, which means, to people in the audience, share this around. If anybody is asking, questions pertaining to this specific topic, it is an important topic. Send them this debate because I think it's a great debate that demonstrates both sides of the argument. the universal ancestry model and the theropod dinosaur to bird model and the separate ancestry model. So Guzzman, that being said, we're going to hand it over to you. You have 5 minutes for your concluding statement. Whenever you are ready, I'll start the timer.
Sure. I just wanted to say I really had a lot of fun. I always love talking about this sort of thing. I've been researching this thing for not very long, probably a year and a half at most is how long I've been researching this, reading as many papers as I could. And I really had fun. I want to thank Jackson for coming on. I want to thank Sandy for hosting it. I want to thank everybody for watching this. I'd like to say thank you to Jackson for the very kind words. But I'd like to say that everything that I have presented here, I hope was to the glory of God and magnifies God's creation. And whatever conclusion you get out of this, I just want everybody to realize that whether we disagree, we can all really just look at God's creation and say, I don't know if Jackson's a theist or not, or Christian, but I look at God's creation and I say, oh Lord, my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands hath made. I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, and then I say, how great thou art. And so I really love this topic, and I really love God's creation. I really love God. And I thank God for this opportunity and for giving us so many things in this universe. The Bible says that it's the glory of God to conceal a thing, and then the honor of kings to search out a matter. And so I think that's what we're doing. We're searching things out. God hides things in this universe so that we can have fun, a little fun, and look at it and say, God, you're so awesome. That's really my last thoughts. Thank you.
All right. I appreciate that, Guzzman. I appreciate that as well. Jackson, thank you, gentlemen, for an awesome debate. Thank you for the concluding statements. Jackson, you've got some compliments in the chat. People saying that your external mic is great and a major improvement since your last debate with Kent.
So wasn't that great.
The debate with Kent went well, though. I mean, I think it's sitting at over 5,000 views right now. You guys had a great discussion, and you're going to be doing a lot more debates on a great variety of kind of creation versus evolution related topics. So it's a great time to get a new mic. So why don't we jump right into the questions then? Again, Jackson, Guzzman, thank you so much for giving us your time for tonight, and thank you for making an engaging, scholarly debate. Lots of great points, very technical. So that being said, we're going to wrap it up at the 2-hour mark. So I'm going to put a timer here, 20 minutes for the Q&A. And we'll get through as many as we can. So why don't we pull them up right now? And the first question that came in all the way at the beginning of the debate in the form of a super chat, Jerome M. Thank you so much, Jerome, for your support and your question. Question for Jackson. How would you explain the recent find of a bird in the stomach of a theropod dinosaur?
That's Eosinopterix, I believe. Eosinopterix, that's how it's pronounced. Had Confuciusornis bones in its stomach. So they lived alongside each other. As already pointed out in this debate, there were some bird-like dinosaurs and dinosaur-like birds living alongside each other in the Cretaceous. But you go back further to the Jurassic, it's just feathered theropods like Siricornis. So I don't find that to be problematic.
Okay, I appreciate the question, Jerome. I appreciate the answer, Jackson. Guzzman, anything you wanted to add to that?
I just want to say I actually have that paper downloaded on my computer. It's a very interesting read. I personally, I know I'm going to probably getting a lot of backlash about this, but I don't think it's really incredibly problematic for the evolutionary worldview. The fact that you have Confuciusornis, which is a sort of basal, they say, bird within a Eosinopterix. It's now, if you were to present that 60 years ago, it would. Like, if you were to present that to John Ostrom back in the 70s, he would have been like, wait, there's no way. That's like, no, that can't be. But now it's kind of like they've kind of like gone away from that and stepped back from that and said like, yeah, whatever. But I will say this, that if you were to test the initial claim that was made by Ostrom and Bacher and colleagues, it would go against that initial claim. So yeah, I do find that to be problematic somewhat.
Okay, Guzzman, I appreciate those additional points. Jackson, it was your question. You can have the final word.
Yeah, if you find Confuciusornis inside of Siricornis, the earliest one known, then that would be a major problem, I think, if you didn't find some precursors to that. So, yeah, that's all I have to say.
All right, I appreciate that. Jackson, super chat comes in from Cute One, $5, says the goose as in the man. So, Guzzman, apparently you are the man with the plan. You got some fans out there. So, next question comes in from Redefine Living. He says, question for Jackson. Because dinosaurs evolved into birds, he says, are birds classified as reptiles because of the law of monophily?
I guess in a roundabout way they would be, but it's a weird yes and no answer. It's I'm not qualified to answer that fully, so that's really all I have to say.
All right, I appreciate that, Jackson. Anything you wanted to add, Guzzman?
I could say something, but I want to get through these questions. So,
okay. All right, I appreciate it, guys. I appreciate it. So this question comes in for the both of you. So we'll get both of your input. This comes in from T-Rock, who will be debating. Snake was right, actually, on the age of the Earth. Actually, I believe that is tomorrow, within the next couple of days, that's for sure. So T-Rock asks, for both participants, what was the first theropod that went from bellows lungs to avian lungs, and how long would that take?
Well, the first one known, I think, is Coelophysis, that had evidence of air sacs in the vertebrae. So I think that would be the earliest one. Another early one would be Allosaurus in the Jurassic period, but Coelophysis would come first. And how long did it take? I'm not exactly certain.
All right, I appreciate that, Jackson. Guzzman, go ahead.
Sure. I will repeat what Jackson said. The first, I think, documented theropod. I don't think Coelophysis is a theropod, but theropod is Coelophysis with air sacs. How long did the transition take? I don't think there was a transition. Can't be dogmatic about that, but I don't think there was. So was there a transition between bellows lungs and avian lungs within theropod dinosaurs? It could be possible that no theropod dinosaur had bellows lungs. Maybe all of them did have air sacs and sort of avian respiration systems. I don't know if that's the case, but yeah, that's what I think. I don't think there was a transition.
All right, I appreciate the answers, Jackson and Guzzman. I appreciate the question, T-Rock, and he will be debating again. Snake was right tomorrow night on the age of the Earth, so that should be another epic debate. Make sure you are here for that. So this one comes in from Brother Timothy, a Standing for Truth member. So I appreciate the support, Timothy. He asks, question for well, he doesn't specify anybody, so I guess you both can get some input here. He asks, would a platypus be considered a dinosaur descendant? And then he in brackets he puts eggs and bill. I guess some of the characteristics of a platypus. Jackson, we can start with you.
Well, no, there's fossil evidence of it came from a monotreme, and it is a monotreme. They're not linked to dinosaurs unless you want to. They're linked to some reptilian-like creatures back in the Permian period, the Therapsids and the Cynodonts in the Triassic, and then mammalia forms further up the Jurassic, and then monotremes, and then it went like that. So no, they're not related to dinosaurs.
Go ahead, Guzzman.
I'll also say the same thing. Platypus are not related to dinosaurs. There's a couple of rules that you have to follow to be considered a dinosaur, and Platypus doesn't really follow those. He's just like, I'm crazy. I'm going to do whatever I want.
All right, great answers, guys. I appreciate it. This one comes in from Cool Jesus. So he says, question for Guzzman. Guzzman, do you think feathered theropods were created on day 5 or day 6?
That's a very good question. And I've actually thought about this. I think you have to define feathered theropods because different feathers have different purposes. Some are used for flight, some are used for just display, warmth, etc. For for physiological purposes. So what the flying theropod dinosaurs, avians obviously are, but let's say, for example, Microraptor, let's say. First of a created kind in the original creation. But let's say it was. Let's assume it was. I think that there's pretty good reason to suggest it was created on day 5, even though we consider it to be a dinosaur. Why? If you look at the book of Deuteronomy, I believe, is where you have the list of birds that the children of Israel cannot eat, and it lists the bat in there. The Bible considers the bat to be a fowl, a bird. Why? Is the Bible wrong in there? No, it's just their way of saying, look, here's a couple flying things that you can't eat, don't eat them. And so Microraptor, by that definition, might have fallen into that definition. Here's a flying thing with a backbone, don't eat it. Microraptor might have fallen in there. And if that's the case, then Microraptor, if it was the original representative of a created kind, might have been created on day 5. No? And then things get even crazier when you have some semi-aquatic dinosaurs like Spinosaurus, where they created on day 5 or day 6. That's an interesting question for another time.
Well, I appreciate that thorough answer and response there, Guzzman. Anything you wanted to add at all, Jackson?
No, I don't think so. I think we can go to the next one.
All right, perfect. So this one comes in from Praise I Am, question for Guzzman. He says, do you think God could have made hybrids? And then in brackets, he puts, for example, terrain and water vehicles.
I just mentioned one. Spinosaurus is kind of like this, let's say, terrain and aquatic vehicle. I mean, it's this thing that lives on land and could have possibly lived partially in water. I don't think there's a problem. I think God did create hybrids when he created a crocodile. I mean, he created it to live on land and to live in the water, or out in crocodile. They live on land and in the water. You have amphibians that live on land and in the water. They're kind of weird. Could God have did it and done it? I think God did do it. Is that problematic? No, it's just, it further magnifies God's creative hand.
I appreciate the response, Guzzman. Jackson, anything you wanted to add to that?
It's more of a biblical definition question, so that's not really my wheelhouse. So we can just go to the next one.
All right, I appreciate that. So this question comes in from Cool Jesus. Again, thanks for the question, Cool Jesus. Question for Guzzman. So he says, 2 million years is too little time to have theropods evolve, but we can get 388 species of parrots in less than 2,000 years, question mark. So what are your thoughts on that, Guzzman?
I don't know where he's getting the 2,000 years from. Let's say 4,000.
4,000.
Yeah, let's say 4,000.
4,500 years, yeah.
Let's say 4,000 years from the flood. 388 species of parrots. As Setacoforms. Setacoforms, I'm not 100% familiar with the group, but I'm pretty sure that parrots are not very, they're probably diverse. They're probably very diverse, but they probably have a lot more in common than they have in difference. And so it's kind of like saying 388 species of dogs from 4,000 years ago. Is that really possible? I mean, yeah, because we have it today. People did that. You know, you see those dogs that you walk down the street, that's what we did. You know, we did that. And so parrots, Setacoforms, and he says more than 2,000 years. Okay, so 4,000 years. I don't really see the problem. Speciation can happen quick. Speciation can happen pretty fast.
All right. I appreciate, again, Guzzman, the thorough answer. Jackson, was there anything you wanted to add before we get to the next question?
Yeah, there are a lot of groups of animals that are like that maybe have a slow reproductive rate that are represented by many species within a single family or even genus. Tortoises, some salamanders. I brought that up in past debates, so I'm not going to go too much into that. But I think you'd be hard pressed to get all the diversity we see from so few of an animal amount of species in 4,000 years.
Thank you, Jackson, for those additional points. Guzzman, anything? Well, it was your question, Guzzman. You can have the last word, brother.
I'm not really well versed on genetics, but I just looked up psittaciforms. There's about 398 recognized species, roughly, and so coming from two, we don't know if those are different created. I don't know if there's more than one different created kind of psittaciforms. Maybe they overlap somewhere with other groups. We don't know if there's only just one group kind of psittaciforms. So maybe there could have been two psittaciforms on the ark. Maybe there could have been 4 or 5, or maybe those just did not exist. Psittaciforms was just not a thing back then, like as a classification scheme. And so it's kind of comparing apples to oranges.
I appreciate it. And guys, I want to compliment you both. You have made for a great Q&A as well. And you're both clearly well studied and well educated on this topic. And it's really made for a great debate. So I appreciate all the prep work that you both did, I'm sure, because as someone who does debates as well frequently, I know debates take a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. And you both have demonstrated that tonight. So fantastic job from the both of you. Very impressive. So we're coming down to the last couple questions here. And this one comes in from Mitchell, another of our Standing for Truth Ministries members. So I appreciate the love and support from all of our supporters and members. As I always say, you guys are the life and blood of this channel. You guys are the reason why we are able to do this full-time and put out full-time content. So Mitchell asks, question for Jackson Rowe. How many millions of years did theropods fall off cliffs to their demise until they learn how to fly? A little bit of tongue-in-cheek question, it looks like, but go ahead, Jackson. Answer however you'd like to.
Well, from Siricornis, a dinosaur with some pennaceous feathers, but was apparently flightless, to Eosinopterix, which was gliding, to something like Archaeopteryx, or maybe not Archaeopteryx, but something like it, that was flying, but with a probably not very far because of its small keel. It's hard to say how long it took, but it wasn't just the dinosaur was jumping off a cliff and decided to fly one day. It wasn't like that.
All right, I appreciate it, Jackson. Anything you wanted to add, Guzzman?
I'm going to talk fast real quick.
Yeah, take your time.
Ostrom kind of suggested this. I think it was Ostrom and colleagues. He said that basically dinosaurs jumped off trees until they slowly evolved these perfect pennaceous feathers that were perfectly developed for flying. And there's kind of like a paradox there almost. And it's like, well, what evolved first? The wants to jump off trees and start gliding, or the feathers to fly? And it's like, well, you evolved the feathers to fly, but you haven't learned to fly yet. It's kind of like a disturbance. It's like you don't want that. It's going to stop you from moving around quickly. And if you're jumping off without pennaceous feathers, it's like, how many times are you going to do that until you can just start flapping your wings with pennaceous feathers and start flying? So there's kind of a paradox there almost.
I appreciate that, Guzzman. Jackson, question was for you. Go ahead. To be fair, you get the final word.
Well, apparently the pennaceous feathers did evolve first from what fossils we do have of that early stage. And the feathers didn't have, they weren't asymmetrical. They didn't have barbules. They were primitive feathers, but they were just starting to become capable of gliding. And of course, we see with things like Archaeopteryx where the feathers are asymmetrical. They're much more modern. So from that span, they've gone from primitive to more complex. So we do see that in the fossil record. That's all I had to add.
Thank you for that response, Jackson. And again, lots of great comments and feedback from the chat. Eloy here says, I'm a new believer and I learned so much by watching the different debates on this channel. Thanks, guys. I appreciate the kind words. If you are new to this channel, check the debate playlist section. We've got now over 135 debates that we have hosted and moderated over the last 2 years on all different types of topics. So if you are a debate addict, please check those out. You can also find more on the website, standingfortruthministries.com. So we are really coming down to the last couple of questions here. And I don't think we did this one yet. Let me just see. I'll put it in chat. Correct me if I did get this one. I'll put it up on screen. Question from Iron Matt, another member. Thank you so much, Iron Matt, for your support. Standing for Truth question. Didn't they find bird fossils in lower layers than dinosaurs? And okay, so the secondary question we did answer. And what about dinosaurs found with birds in their stomachs? You guys answered that. I believe that was one of the first or second questions. But the first part, if you gentlemen wanted to respond to that, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the whole debate's kind of been saying, I've been saying they're predecessors to the birds. They aren't found in front of some of the feathered theropods. So I've answered that a few times, I think.
Thank you, Jackson. Guzzman, go ahead.
I've heard of some bird tracks being found in like Cambrian rock and stuff like that. I haven't been able to like verify it through a paleontological database or something like that, but it might be possible and I'm not aware of it, or it's just they're either like hoaxes or maybe they're just reshuffling of the geologic strata and whatnot. But you know, I don't know.
All right, guys, great responses. Okay, so here, last couple questions. This question is for Guzzman. Guzzman, what were dinosaurs called by humans before the 1800s?
What were dinosaurs? This sounds like a Jeopardy question. I think he wants me to say. I think he wants me to say dragon. No. So dinosaurs. Dinosaur was called dinosaur. Comes from two Latin words, I believe, dinos and sauros, terrible lizards. We now know that they're not lizards, and some were actually not so terrible. But what were they called before them? They were called dragons. People probably looked at the bones and they're just like, these things are huge. They're like, these are giants. There's actually a story. Thomas Jefferson sent out Lewis and Clark to find these huge animals that he thinks might have existed one time, that because in England they found this giant, we know it was the tip of a dinosaur fossil, and it looked like the tip of a leg bone of a human, a giant mammal. And so Thomas Jefferson's like, guys, go find something this huge. They never did, of course. They came back empty-handed, and they're like, no, we have no idea what that is. We now know it was a dinosaur fossil. We know Romans, ancient Romans and Greeks found dinosaur fossils, and Native Americans found dinosaur fossils before they were ever recognized as dinosaurs. And yeah, they were obviously called dragons before the 1800s.
Thank you for that response, Guzzman, and a great, and as you know, common question. Jackson, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just the Thomas Jefferson thing. I remember reading that in the book. They assumed that dinosaurs and mammoths and mastodons and all those were still alive today. So Lewis and Clark probably didn't expect to come back, I imagine. But obviously, yeah, they didn't find them. That's all I have to say.
All right, I appreciate it, Guzzman. Any last words you want to add to that one?
No. Next question. Okay.
All right, last question of the night. We made it, and we are just at the 2-hour mark. We still got over 50 people in the chat, so you guys have entertained and you guys have captivated the audience. So great question, or great debate. Last question for Guzzman: is Behemoth a dinosaur? Behemoth found in Job.
Ooh, Job chapter 40 is interesting. Job chapter 39, 40, and 41. Those three chapters are very, very interesting. Of course, the whole book of Job is, but those three is what everybody likes. Job 39 describes something called a unicorn, and if you look at a Spanish translation of the Bible of the Holy Scriptures, it'll translate that as buffalo, a buffalo. And so, I don't think there were buffaloes in the Middle East at the time of Job, but there might be. I'm not aware of any. The unicorn was probably a rhinoceros. It'd be weird if Behemoth in Job chapter 40 was referring to the same thing as Job 39 was referring to as unicorn. It would be weird that the scriptures give two different names for the exact same thing within two different chapters. It says, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eats grass as an ox." And it goes on with the description. It also says that his nose pierces through snares. And I said not many years ago, but a couple of years ago, I said that that's probably a ceratopsian. A behemoth. Okay, cool. Where is it? I don't know. I'm not aware of any ceratopsians in the Middle East. There were a couple of sauropods in the Middle East. It'd be interesting to see. I think that there's pretty good reason to think that Job 40 is talking about dinosaur. I think that there's pretty good reason to think so. And then there's also obviously pretty good reason to not believe so. But I think that it is. I think that it is talking about dinosaur.
All right. I appreciate that answer, Guzzman. Again, very thorough. And again, a very common question, as you know. Jackson, anything you wanted to add to the question or anything that Guzzman may have said there?
Well, I think you probably know what I'm going to say. That it was most likely an elephant. I mean, just the description of the nose, I think that's the most likely answer.
And Guzzman, you get the final word on that.
Sure. Pierces, I think, is like it's a word to describe cut. I don't think elephants' noses cut through things. But, next question. I don't have anything else to say.
You know what? One final question that came in just now in the chat, and the chat is moving quick, so I hope I can find it. And yes, I just found it right now, so we will end it with this one. Another question for you, Guzzman. This Q&A was great because we had a good balance of questions for the debaters. So Cool Jesus asks, one last question for Guzzman. Great questions tonight, Cool Jesus. I appreciate it. So he says, if you feel up to it, if theropods and pterosaurs all went extinct at the Cretaceous/flood 4350 years ago, how did they all go extinct?
Great question. I like that he threw in there pterosaurs. Matthew McLean is a great guy to talk to about pterosaurs and dinosaurs if anybody's interested. Matthew McLean at the Masters University. But to answer the question, how did they all go extinct? I don't think they all went extinct at the same time, to be honest. I mean, birds, I think would be I classify birds as dinosaurs. So what? So obviously you don't have all dinosaurs going extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, the Cretaceous Paleogene flood boundary. I think that there were some. I think that Noah took dinosaurs on the ark with him. I don't think it's a stretch to think that. He took dinosaurs on the ark with him, and dinosaurs went extinct shortly thereafter, probably. I mean, there's probably a reason why. Maybe the climate. We know that there was an ice age after the flood. We know that the Earth was still chaotic after the flood. That's why you have the layers after the Cretaceous. You think, well, if the flood made the Cretaceous down, then what's everything on top of that? Well, that's what's after the flood, all the aftershocks, if you will, of the flood. The Earth recovering from its injuries and from its wounds. And so the dinosaurs probably went extinct right somewhere around there, and they just didn't get preserved, and that's what I think.
All right, great detailed answer to, I completely agree, Guzzman. A very, very good question worth discussing. So Jackson, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that above the KT boundary, the iridium-rich layer, where it's theorized the asteroid hit, and that's where the iridium comes from. You don't find any pterosaurs or theropods or non-avian theropods or sauropods or anything like that. And if you did, that would shake things up quite a bit. That's all I have to add.
A really, really good debate. Please, everybody in the audience, share this around. It's such an important topic that I believe needs more discussion.
Since it came up earlier, Chicxulub. What's interesting about Chicxulub, the Chicxulub crater, is that obviously it's underwater and under a lot of you can't actually see the Chicxulub crater today. But around the perimeter of the Chicxulub crater, you have a lot of small craters. In Spanish, they're called cenotes. And so they're like these little caves that surround. There's I think 28 of these caves surrounding Chicxulub. I've actually been there and I've actually seen some of the cenotes. They're pretty awesome. And you see fossils in all these cenotes and everything. It's really, really cool. You should see it if you ever get the chance. You should definitely go to Chicxulub. And I think there's actually pretty good evidence to suggest that there was something that happened there, namely a Chicxulub comet or meteorite, whatever it was, an extraterrestrial object, extraterrestrial object. Yeah.